I honestly didn't expect that reaction at all. I had played the moment over in my head so many times, imagining calm understanding, maybe a few questions, maybe even quiet agreement. I prepared myself for disappointment or indifference, but not for what actually happened. When I finally spoke up and said what I had been holding in, the room changed instantly. The air felt heavier, and the expressions on their faces told me I had completely misread the situation. That was the moment I realized how dangerous assumptions can be. I thought I had been careful with my words. I chose them slowly, trying to sound reasonable and respectful. In my mind, I was being honest without being hurtful. I expected people to appreciate the clarity, or at least understand where I was coming from. Instead, I saw confusion first, then shock, and then something that looked like disappointment. No one raised their voice, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. It made me question whether I had spoken too late, or too early, or in entirely the wrong way. As the conversation continued, it became clear that everyone else had been carrying a different version of the story. While I believed I was helping by being transparent, others felt blindsided. What I saw as honesty, they experienced as betrayal. That hurt more than I expected. I realized that timing matters just as much as truth, and that good intentions don't automatically soften impact. The gap between what I meant and what they heard felt impossibly wide. Afterward, I replayed every second in my head. I wondered if I could have said it differently, or if I should have waited longer. I questioned my own awareness, realizing how focused I had been on expressing myself that I hadn't fully considered how others were feeling. I had assumed readiness instead of checking for it. That mistake taught me that communication isn't just about speaking clearly. It's about listening first and understanding the emotional context. What surprised me most was how quickly relationships can shift. One conversation changed dynamics that had taken years to build. Trust didn't disappear instantly, but it cracked, and I could feel the difference in every interaction afterward. People were more cautious, more distant. That reaction forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Even when you believe you're doing the right thing, you're still responsible for how it affects others. In the days that followed, I tried to explain myself, but explanations felt weaker than I hoped. Some people listened, others didn't. I learned that once a reaction happens, you can't undo it. You can only respond to it. I had to accept that understanding takes time, and sometimes it never comes in the way you expect. Not everyone will see your intentions the way you do, and that doesn't always mean they're wrong. Looking back now, I see that the reaction I didn't expect was actually a lesson I needed. It taught me to pause before speaking, to consider not just what I want to say, but how and when to say it. It reminded me that honesty without empathy can feel harsh, and clarity without care can create distance. I didn't expect that reaction at all, but it changed how I communicate forever. After some time passed, I started to notice how that moment continued to ripple through everything. Small interactions felt different, heavier, like everyone was choosing their words more carefully around me. I couldn't blame them. I had done the same thing after hearing what I didn't expect. That reaction had planted a sense of caution on both sides, and rebuilding ease felt harder than breaking it ever was. I realized that trust doesn't just break in loud moments. It also weakens quietly when people feel unsure about where they stand. I also began reflecting on why I hadn't expected that reaction in the first place. The truth was uncomfortable. I had been so focused on my own courage in speaking up that I failed to recognize how unprepared others might have been to hear it. I assumed shared understanding without confirming it. I confused my readiness with everyone else's, and that assumption shaped the outcome more than my actual words did. It taught me that communication is not a performance, it's a shared process, and skipping one side of it creates imbalance. Slowly, I tried to repair what I could. I didn't rush for forgiveness or agreement. Instead, I focused on consistency, on showing through actions that I was still the same person, just more aware. Some conversations were awkward, others surprisingly honest. A few people opened up about how they felt in that moment, and hearing their perspective helped me understand the depth of the reaction I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't anger that hurt the most. It was the feeling of being caught off guard. Over time, the intensity of that moment softened, but it never completely disappeared. It became a reference point, a quiet reminder of how powerful words can be when timing and emotion collide. I learned to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it, to accept that not every reaction needs an immediate solution. Sometimes the most respectful response is patience. Now, when I think back, I don't see that reaction as a failure. I see it as a turning point. It taught me that understanding doesn't come from speaking alone, but from listening, waiting, and recognizing when silence might be more thoughtful than explanation. I didn't expect that reaction at all, but it reshaped how I handle honesty, responsibility, and the weight of my words. With more distance from that moment, I began to understand how much of my fear came from losing control of the narrative. I had expected a certain response because I wanted reassurance that I had handled things well. When that reassurance didn't come, I felt exposed. That reaction forced me to sit with uncertainty instead of escaping it. I learned that needing validation can quietly influence how and when we speak, even when we tell ourselves we're being brave and honest. I also noticed how easily we underestimate the emotional weight of our words. What feels like one honest sentence to us can land like a set-in storm for someone else. I started paying closer attention to people's expressions, their pauses, the things they didn't say. Those unspoken reactions often carried more truth than words. It made me realize that communication isn't just about being clear, it's about being present and receptive to what follows. There were moments when I wanted to explain myself again, to reframe everything so it would finally make sense to them, but I stopped myself. I understood that repeating explanations wouldn't change how that first reaction felt to them. Sometimes respect means allowing people to process in their own time, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Letting go of the urge to fix everything immediately was one of the hardest lessons. Eventually, the tension eased, not because everything was resolved, but because we all adapted. Conversations slowly regained warmth, though a certain awareness remained. That awareness wasn't entirely negative. It made interactions more thoughtful, more intentional. I became more careful with timing, more considerate of emotional readiness, and less attached to how I hoped people would respond. Now, when I look back, I don't replay the moment with shame anymore. I see it as a reminder of how complex human reactions are and how limited our expectations can be. I didn't expect that reaction at all, but it taught me that growth often begins exactly where expectations fail, and that understanding others requires patience, humility, and the willingness to learn from discomfort. As time went on, I realized that the moment had also changed how I saw myself. Before, I believed that if I was honest and calm, things would naturally work out. That belief gave me a sense of control, a formula I thought I could rely on. When the reaction shattered that idea, I was forced to accept that human emotions don't follow logic or plans. People bring their own histories, fears, and expectations into every conversation, and no amount of preparation can fully account for that. Understanding this made me more patient, not just with others, but with myself. I started noticing how often I had expected smooth outcomes simply because my intentions were good. That realization humbled me. It made me pause before speaking, not out of fear, but out of respect for the complexity of the moment. I learned to ask questions before making statements, to check emotional ground before stepping forward. This didn't mean I stopped being honest, but I became more mindful of how honesty could be shaped by care and timing. The experience also taught me the value of silence. I used to see silence as avoidance or weakness, something that needed to be filled. Now I understood that silence can be space for reflection, healing, and understanding. In the aftermath of that unexpected reaction, silence allowed emotions to settle and clarity to emerge slowly. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Looking back, I can see how that single reaction influenced countless moments afterward. It reshaped my approach to difficult conversations, deepened my empathy, and reminded me that connection requires more than courage. It requires sensitivity. I didn't expect that reaction at all, but it became one of the most important lessons I've learned about communication, patience, and the unpredictable nature of human responses. Even now, I still think about that moment when I feel the urge to speak too quickly or assume understanding without checking first. It has become a quiet reminder to slow down, to breathe, and to consider the emotional landscape before stepping into it. I no longer see communication as something you deliver and walk away from. It's something you stay with, something you remain responsible for even after the words are spoken. That awareness has changed how I approach not just difficult conversations, but everyday interactions as well. I also learned that reactions are not always reflections of rejection. Sometimes they are signs of surprise, fear, or unprocessed emotion. Back then, I took the reaction personally, as if it defined me or my intentions. With time, I realized it was more about where everyone else was in that moment than about me alone. That understanding eased the weight I carried. It allowed me to hold compassion for others without losing compassion for myself. What stays with me most is how unpredictable honesty can be. You can prepare your words, control your tone, and still not control the outcome. Accepting that uncertainty has made me more grounded. I no longer chase perfect responses or ideal reactions. Instead, I focus on being present, respectful, and open to learning from whatever comes next. I didn't expect that reaction at all, but it taught me that growth often begins where comfort ends, and that sometimes the most powerful lessons arrive disguised as moments of discomfort.